webinar today about gender and IoT, smart technologies in domestic and sexual abuse. With us today, we have Dr. Leonie Tanczer, who is a researcher, lecturer in international security and emerging technologies at University College London, Department of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy. And that's I guess it's the acronym STEaPP. And
yeah.
Leonie, under STEaPP, I'll let her introduce herself in further details. But the topic which is going to be looked at today is something that I certainly wasn't quite aware of, and that certainly is very interesting regarding implications of all these new technologies that are coming up. And that are, I can't even say that we'll see tomorrow because many of them are already with us today. So the way that we'll have the webinar today is we'll first get Dr. Tanczer to go through her deck of slides and I guess maybe from start to end. And then afterwards, since this is a 1 hour call, we'll be able to open the floor for questions and comments and an overall discussion. If I may ask everyone to make sure that their microphone is muted during the presentation, that usually helps. I think that the default is for the microphones to be muted when people come in. This is using Zoom meeting. It's quite self-explanatory. You have to open the Manage Participants window, and you can also open the chat. You can write comments and questions on the chat. If you haven't got your microphone enabled, or if you prefer to ask your questions and make comments on the chat. But then, as I said later, we'll open the floor for anyone to ask questions and make comments by being able to speak. So that's how we're planning it today. Let's hope the technology doesn't kill us in any way. And without further ado, I hand the floor over to Dr. Tanczer. So welcome, and thank you for coming to see us and providing us with this very interesting introduction on this topic that deserves a lot more visibility out there. So over to you, Leonie.
Thank you very much, Olivier. I hope everybody can hear me okay. If not, I have the chat function open, so I will see if something goes wrong. It's a pleasure to discuss our research project on gender and IoT with you. The topic itself is quite new and emerging, but in itself, technology-facilitated abuse is quite an important topic that has haunted us, I guess, for a substantial amount of time. I will try to talk for 40 minutes and leave 20 minutes for discussion. And what I'm planning to do today, and what I hope you will be able to learn, is that you basically are able to challenge the question of technology being neutral and what actually technology facilitated abuse is. So I have an understanding of what that term encompasses and how do smart technology facilitate increasingly technology facilitated abuse. And because this talk is about industry actors or Internet Society, I very much affiliate with people in this realm. I want to also address how the industry or tech vendors can come into play to help tackle this emerging problem. The really important message I want to transport are three across this presentation. One, technology is gendered. That shouldn't come as a surprise to us. You can think of various examples. For example, the phone sizes we are using. In the past, bicycles were primarily designed for males. Also, fMRI scans or advanced image technology is often targeted primarily and tested primarily at male-enabled bodies. Perhaps you've heard that crash test dummies in the future were also primarily tested on male bodies, which meant that more women were engaged in accidents that ended up deadly. And the other thing we have seen is, if you target a specific market and a specific gendered market, also the idea of making things prettier, perhaps pink or with flowers, whatsoever, that it targets a specific audience. Now, this idea of technology being gendered is important because it manifests itself in the representation of the design the usage and the control and the effects that technology has. And we see this in our research on IoT systems increasingly, because the representation of who is creating these technology meant to use them, but also influences the design and how it is created, but also the usage and the resulting effects that are developed. I'm in the IoT field for quite some time. I'm quite used to hearing that IoT will not just revolutionize, but also help our environment. And especially I've been told by various industry actors that it probably means that we have, as for example, females, less work in a household. I would like to refer in this regard to a really important study by Ruth Cohen, which basically showed that in the 60s, the same arguments were brought forward around, like, for example, dishwashers or vacuum cleaners, but instead of like liberating people, it actually created a different cleanliness standard and transformed housekeeping that primarily negatively affected women. And I think it's important to recognize this in the discussions around IoT, because we have an envisioning of like what IoT will do to the current society, but what that does to the future society might mean we just change the standards and effects and, you know, usage that we have for these systems. And so gender really matters because we need to insert a gendered lens when we design these systems. And I don't want to just refer to social categories such as gender, but also race, sexual identity. These are all factors that we can't ignore in the design of these systems, because they will have different effects for different people and their needs. The second point I want to make is technology is abused. So technology is gendered, but technology is abused. And if you have never watched The Demon Seed, I highly recommend you to do so. It's a film from the 1977. And when I watched it for the first time, I was shocked in how forward-thinking and accurate the portrayal of potential future technologies in the 70s was. And it's actually a film that very much portrays what we are currently researching, which is the domestic household and how technologies such as robots, but also smart speakers, etc., are affecting, in this context, a woman in her own household. So very accurate for what we currently are studying in the 2000s. To give you a bit of context when I'm referring to technology facilitated abuse, and this is a very, very big category. Refuge is a UK-wide service for women victims and survivors of domestic abuse, and they have recorded 920 incidences just from January to August 2018. Now, it's important to account for the fact that Refuge is only one of the few services in the UK that actually records explicitly how technology is affecting victims and survivors of domestic abuse. That means other services may or may not have these information in their database, which makes it incredibly hard for researchers like myself to respond to question how widespread this phenomena is. But also the difficulty of calling it technology facilitated abuse means that we can classify, are we talking about smartphones? Are we talking about tablets? Are we talking about personalized computers? Or are we talking towards really sophisticated or more advanced systems such as IoT devices? So we just have a big bucket that we haven't really thought of how to cluster and categorize. The other thing I want to bring to your mind is we have very much predefined ideas of what perpetrators or criminals should look like. Probably the industry actors in this room here are thinking of like hackers, external threat actors, whereas in the police sector, for example, perpetrators might be, if you're a domestic abuse police officer, a specific type of perpetrator that might be male, that might be of a certain age group, etc. We also have a predefined idea of what abuse looks like. And I assume the majority of people subconsciously would think about domestic abuse or intimate partner violence, seeing probably a bruised woman with a black eye, and instead of someone who might be sitting at home, being far removed from a perpetrator because he or she is geographically far away, and just having psychological or emotional effects. And so domestic abuse should be really accounted for the different factors that come here into play. It may not just be physical abuse, but also psychological, sexual, financial, emotional, and technical. And we increasingly have focused on the earlier mentioned categories rather than the latter. And we also have predefined ideas what technologies mean. And what I mean with that is that we in the domestic abuse sector primarily look at like conventional technologies such as smartphones and laptops because they are more widespread used. And so we have occurred and encountered them more than, for example, IoT system. And that makes it difficult also to record these, you know, unique examples of IoT because people might not be actively asking and questioning if these systems are coming into play. So there's a growing body of work around tech abuse. I have a whole folder full of them. But really what unifies the tech abuse research as of now is very much that they're focused on online harassment. So what we assume when it comes to Twitter, or you might remember the incidents of Gamergate a few years ago, where women are targeted online, and I do mention women because it is primarily women in this context, and targeted for their gender and harassed online. Cyber stalking or cyber-enabled stalking is another big research field. So how technologies are used to, for example, follow and track a victim. Spyware is similarly, or spouseware, there's different words for it, but ultimately it's malicious code or software programs that often are installed without the consent of a victim, allowing someone to install a keylogger or trace the text messages that are being sent, or even delete messages that have been sent to that phone. And the last point that is very popular, a research topic, is image-based abuse. So some of you might have heard of the term revenge porn, which is a very controversial definer. But ultimately, it boils down to having your image involuntarily leaked, released, uploaded to YouPorn or other websites. And that is an increasing risk for victims because it's relatively hard to get a hold of the people who have uploaded it, and also bringing it down from websites such as YouPorn. What all these studies really have in common is that there's also often a repurposing of technology. And what I mean with that is the designers, the industry actors were envisioning that technologies are used in a certain way. They're not envisioning necessarily how they might be abused and repurposed for malicious intentions. From my perspective, there are also conventional technologies in the previous studies, meaning that they focus on smartphones, tablets, personal laptops, rather than emerging technologies such as video-connected CCTV cameras or smart speakers. They often affect primarily women and BAME groups. And from our research, it's also an active commitment from the perpetrator needed. And what I mean with that is, and you will see the difference when it comes to IoT, is I need access, for example, to the phone to install stalkerware. I need the ability to access the browser history to, for example, monitor what my partner is searching. BAME groups are Black, Asian minority groups and ethnic minority groups, for those of you who perhaps are not familiar with that term. The third point I want to make, after technology is gendered, technology is abused, technology is changing. And I think the three factors we need to account for when it comes to the design, especially of IoT systems, but also the design of legislation when it comes to domestic abuse or intimate partner violence. And what I want to mention here is the big term, the Internet of Things, which is a term that means everything and nothing. But ultimately, the IoT is an umbrella term. So we are very much familiar with conventional technologies such as laptops, tablets, smartphones, but increasingly, these systems are used to connect with other systems that have often been previously offline and previously been devices that we use in our day-to-day encounter. And what we're doing now is we make them smart by allowing them to be networked and talk to each other and being controlled from my tablet, perhaps, which allows them to become smart because they collect data, they actuate based on the data input that I've provided, and they allow to speak to another. Now, I do want to mention one important factor. I'm not the type of person who wants to say that that these systems are so incredibly smart. As of now, they often require an individual to insert an action. May it be that you request Alexa, or Alexa is the AI system, Google, Amazon Echo would be just the physical device, to basically request the AI system to do an action. In the future, we envision that this would be probably more automatic, by basically just learning certain patterns and preferences, and then these systems doing this without a request. But we're probably not there yet, and that's both good and bad. An important other factor I want to mention is what these IoT systems really are. So they're embedded connected devices. You have them both in the gadgets that we are thinking of, but also the small sensors we might have in the street lights, to like really complex cyber physical systems such as connected autonomous vehicles. They're pervasive and ubiquitous. So you can really have them embedded and sensors embedded in literally anything in what you want to, and they transmit and collect data. And what they collect is also very wide ranging. It might just be humidity information or temperature information, but it could also be extremely personal information, such as, for example, information around like my heart rate, my sweat level, my temperature, my preferences. And if you accumulate all that information together, that really makes a difference. And as I said, currently, most of them require us to still do an act, but in the future, we expect that they do conduct actions and without direct human intervention. Now, why is this important? So these systems are increasing. Currently, we suspect around 10 billion devices are connected. In the next years, they're expected to more than double. And there's a lot of different statistics out there, and I do suspect that the 125 billion are probably not accurate either. But I just want to, with those statistics, emphasize to you that these systems are here to stay. They're not going to go away, and we will probably are better off dealing with their vulnerabilities and exploitation now than in the future, when we have 25 billion of these devices on the market and in the free world. The other important point I want to make is there's a lot of risk, uncertainties, and opportunities connected with these systems. I'm waiting for the phone call from Google and Amazon to this very day to stop talking about IoT and domestic abuse. And I do want to acknowledge that there's also opportunities, and I will mention them in a couple of slides in the future. But I do want to say that we also have no understanding of what the uncertainties of these devices would mean for us as a collective group, nation, world population. And I think that's really what makes a lot of people wary about installing IoT systems, purchasing IoT systems. But I think it's important to discuss those publicly in order to have basically the ability to make a decision about whether or not and where we want to have these installed. This is a graphic we've designed to communicate, for example, where IoT systems could be of risk to victims of domestic violence and abuse. You have to take into account that when it comes to domestic violence and abuse, as someone currently said, the majority of perpetrators are in charge of the devices, they're owner of the devices, and they also have often the control over these systems. So for us, it was important to highlight the pervasiveness of IoT systems that one can encounter. And of course, there could be far more, but this is just to illustrate that it ranges from your conventional systems down to your smart TV, your smart speaker, and the smart heating, but also the smart lock, which is a really important factor to take into account here. And I do want to mention here the router, which plays an important role for the connectivity of these systems, with router security, from my perspective, being of increasing importance now that we're moving into the IoT environment. So what makes these systems smart? As I said, we try to communicate this also to support services who we're working with. This ranges from currently voice control, audio recording, video recording, data collection, which again is like ranging from from sweat levels to heartbeat rates. Shared account is a really important point when it comes to domestic abuse, because the question is who is admin and who is able to access the data that is gathered through these IoT systems. Location tracking has historically been a really big issue with conventional systems such as smartphones. Also, the machine learning aspect is something I think we haven't really thought about, but I do want to mention it because we have, I think, not considered what it means to be, for example, in an abusive relationship for 10 years, getting out of this relationship, and the data that is being collected over those 10 years might not be reflective of your preference and your needs and wants. And what are we going to do then? Are we starting from scratch? What will victims and survivors, what kind of support will they receive in that regard? So we are talking about something which you could call smart abuse. So the fact that many of these IoT systems are disguised in what they can do. They look like normal devices often, and you can purchase them without even fully understanding the extent of data that is collected, and they have enhanced functionality, and they're expanding and exacerbating the reach of a perpetrator in the environment. So previously, they could, for example, use a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop, but now they also have a video functionality, a smart TV that they can use, or even a lock that they could remotely control. And one really, really important point I want to make is the underestimation and the overestimation of their functionalities is equally dangerous. And we have seen this working with support services in domestic abuse sector, because many support workers would argue for themselves that they're not tech savvy, and similar, many victims feel, for example, that they are not tech savvy. You can easily tell them, for example, that they, that this smart device has functionalities that it actually doesn't contain, which makes them just as scared as if you don't tell them what functionalities they have that could be exploited. And so I think it is important to, in our research and our public debate, not to hype IoT devices, to create this idea, oh my God, they're so smart and we're scared of them, but equally not to talk about their functionalities would risk victims as much as to tell them too much, because then they are not capable of understanding, okay, there's a video control, there's audio control, and I need to protect myself against that. I'm not doing this research by myself. I have great colleagues on board that are working with me, including my good friend, Dr. Simon Parkin in the computer science department at UCL, Dr. Trupti Patel, Isabel Lopez, George Danasis, and Julia Slupska. So we are, over the last 2 years, worked quite actively in this space. And we're conducting something I would call action research. So we're not the kind of traditional scholars, or the old-fashioned scholars, some would rather call, where we do a literature review, go into the lab, test something, publish a paper, and then say, ta-da, that's it. Rather, we have co-developed our research with people in the field to ensure that our work directly feeds back to those people that need it. So we've worked with the London Violence Against Women and Girls Consortium, which is our 29 women's rights organizations and refuges, who operate both in London, but many of which are operating across the UK. We're working with Tetras, which is the IoT hub in the UK. And we're working with Privacy International, which is a digital rights organization. And I'm glad to say that we also have very good connection with departmental departments in the UK, including DCMS, which is the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and increasingly also the National Cybersecurity Center, which we think is important to ensure that any research finding is directly fed back to policy decisions. And what is our aim in our research? Well, we really wanted to set out 2017 to start to investigate the role and impact that IoT technologies have on victims and survivors. We also understand the risk trajectories and how they change from conventional systems such as smartphones and laptops, but really importantly, what is the awareness victims, but also support services that work with victims, may it be statutory services such as the police, but also voluntary services such as domestic abuse charities have when it comes to IoT systems. And we're doing a range of different activities. We conduct workshops, focus groups, interviews, but also trainings, which I guess is relatively unconventional for university research. And I'm very proud to say that we've also organized a crypto party, which is a technical digital security training event for support services, where they had the chance to speak to technologists about the concerns and hopefully also get some answers that they could implement in their day-to-day practice. And the outcomes that I want to talk about are threefold. One, I think what we have delivered so far, and we hope to deliver if we're lucky with further research funding, is co-developed research that ensures that we speak directly to the needs of the stakeholders we engage with, may it be domestic abuse charities, policy actors, but also industry actors. We're very interested in capacity building and knowledge exchange, because we don't just want to publish an academic paper and let that, the information we have go to waste. And we want to be transformative, because we do believe that this research is important to change practices for the better and point out perhaps instances where technology, but also services can be improved. So talking a bit about the research and our findings that we have so far. So for example, when it comes to survey work we're doing, we often ask kind of how often actually technology facilitated abuse is of concern for those services engage with victims and survivors, and actually something that they encounter nearly once a day, at least once a week. And this is increasing. If you think about, we started 2017, as we go progress further, and we see more and more of the respondents reporting that they do it on a day-to-day basis, see tech abuse on a day-to-day basis. Also, the other insights that we have found is there's a real lack of knowledge from the support sector. So if you think about it, you might be a technologist and feel very comfortable explaining, how these systems work, or you might feel capable of finding out how to, change privacy settings, how to change certain apps that you've installed. But frontline staff often feel that they don't have the knowledge to do that, and they also feel like that they can't, help have the required knowledge to help victims and survivors when they come and approach them with questions. The other thing I really want to highlight is physical violence remains easier to prove, and that is partially a big factor when it comes to the policing of domestic abuse. You need to have a record of the different contacts that your perpetrator had with you, and that requires often the technical analysis of these systems. And we have speaking with police officers heard that often this takes 6 months for them to just analyze a smartphone. So if you think about the scale of systems that they will have to analyze in a domestic abuse case in the future, I wonder if the police forces in the UK at least will be able to keep track of all the systems that they need to analyze to enable a prosecution of a perpetrator. And that also relates to police are behind the times in regards to their own tech, but also knowledge about the tech. And often the domestic abuse units does not necessarily speak with the cybercrime unit. So there is ways we could perhaps improve the service provisions and support for victims and survivors by making those units connect. Really important is also smart tech, or just tech in general, is the last thing anyone thinks about when it comes, to domestic violence. You will have to deal with so many other factors, making sure your children are safe, making sure you leave in time, making sure you tiptoe around the perpetrator to not make them aware of when you want to leave or how you want to, that you don't want to offend him. So thinking about technology is not on everyone's mind, even though it is for technologists. And the really important point is we have heard increasingly that victims and survivors are encouraged just to go offline. And I really want to stress that is not a response we can give domestic abuse victims anymore. We are living in a society that is reliant on the internet, and we are reliant on increasingly smart devices. Telling anyone to go offline is just not feasible, and access to, for example, support services is actually increasingly facilitated by the internet. I do want to mention, and I said it before, there is a positive impact to IoT, but it has to be put into context. So increasingly, a lot of support services have told us that, it's good that you can log evidence in addition to, for example, the logging of smartphone or snapshots. You perhaps can audio record the abuse you're receiving through the Amazon Echo. There's video footage that can be collected where also there's evidence that you can bring to prosecution. It also enables you to stay in communication and contact with friends through other means than your phone. And there's also huge discussion around like protection or detection. Now, personally, I'm not the biggest supporter of the idea that one day Amazon Alexa will tell me, I think you're in a, Leonie, I think you're in a domestic abuse relationship. because if the system would tell me that, when would it tell me that, and how would it respond, and how would it respond appropriately to my reaction to? But this is something I've heard from other IoT vendors, and I think it would be interesting to have a discussion of how IoT could prevent or protect or detect abuse, but I worry that it would leave survivors in a really weak state, because it could happen in an incident where the perpetrator is in the room, and it would also take away from the empowerment that a person receives by deciding to actually leave you know, an abusive relationship. We also talk a lot with them about IoT technologies and if they see them. Now, I do want to point you out this don't know section. We have a follow-up question after this where we ask often, so which type of IoT systems are you seeing in your day-to-day practice? And often these responses indicate to us that domestic abuse services do not know what IoT is and do not necessarily differentiate or have an understanding that apps, smartphones, tablets, browsers are different from, for example, a smart CCTV camera or a smart lock. And I think that shows me, for example, that we have to do more to educate the sector, that they have an understanding of the range of systems that can be abused, so they look for them as well and have a way of dealing with them if they occur. We also conducted technical analysis, and I do want to give full credit to Dr. Simon Parking and Dr. Trupti Patel, who were detrimental in or essential for this analysis to pursue, where we looked at the management, the assumption, the usage of these devices. So ultimately, what we did is we purchased a couple of IoT systems and thought, if we were really, really bad actors, how would we go about abusing them? And we looked, for example, at the Google Home, amongst others, and we were very concerned by, for example, certain aspects where users could, for example, see what other what searches other people have done, and that there was, but for example, in this context, we found that there's different, you know, ways that you can train Google Home to detect different audio voices, so it could log information at different accounts. But again, in a domestic abuse relationship, often conventional protections that would work for a healthy relationship will not apply, because there's one person in control over another. That doesn't allow a victim and survivor to make use of these security features. I really want to mention one important aspect. When we talk about domestic abuse or intimate partner violence, we need to think about different stages where abuse is happening. And IoT or technology has different roles and functions in each three of those. So for example, if a victim is still living in an environment with the partner, IoT could pose a risk for the, if you give guidance in that moment, for example, for the person to change certain systems while she or he is still living with the partner, it could flag something to the perpetrator saying, well, why are you doing this, and escalate things. While the person is, for example, in this phase where they try to escape. So for example, they are packing up their things and moving to a refuge or to their sister or mother-in-law or whatever. This is also the highest risk period of time. So most homicides happen in this section. So any advice that would be given from support services, from tech vendors if victims call for help, but also from police, has to account in what risk situation the victim is, and what suggesting, for example, changing systems could mean and trigger to the perpetrator. And the last point is, once the victim has extracted herself or himself or themselves from an environment, an abusive environment, and tries to rebuild their life by, for example, renting a new flat, building up a new network of friends, and also purchasing new devices, they need complete different advice, because in this situation they might need to be advised to change all their accounts, change all their passwords. So I hope I could make clear here that talking about advice has to account for the different risk stages and different phases people are in, and that makes it so incredibly hard to give one information leaflet to every victim, because every victim is in a different stage. Every perpetrator that they're facing is different. So this is something we as researchers really struggle with, because while we wish we could provide guidance for support services, it's just so hard to make an assessment of each of those phases and the needs that the technical needs that are coming along with those different risk factors. We also have a publication that I want to point you to that is open access, available if you're interested in this a bit more closely. Now, in addition to the research aspect, we are very much engaged in capacity building, as I mentioned before. So for example, we kind of prompt support services to think more carefully, are you actually recording technology facilitated abuse? So they have the knowledge to think about, well, actually we don't, perhaps we should, because perhaps that prompts situations with an survivor that we haven't thought about earlier. And because we have perhaps technologists in this room, I think equally the question technologists should ask themselves, are we recording domestic abuse incidents that are reported, for example, through our support work line? The other thing we're doing is we provide information material that we also test with the support sector. So for example, these were some earlier drafts we had, and that ultimately resulted in this, which is available online, and a resource list that we keep continuously up to date to refer victims, but also support workers to available material where they can inform themselves about better security practices. Now, one really important thing I want to mention is I'm not saying that it is down to the victim and survivor to protect him or herself. I actually think this is something, you know, society needs to ask the question of like, why are systems prone to abuse and why abuse even happens? So, you know, I really want to stress this at this stage. I don't see it as a requirement for them to educate themselves, but unfortunately, because of the lack of information and support that is also for perpetrator programs, it is often down to victims to educate themselves. We also, as I said, provide training, and I think that would be something where I think perhaps in the future Internet Society could be engaged with, where we try to bring support workers who work with victims and survivors together with technologists so they can ask questions that are really down to the core foundations of their day-to-day work, but they don't know how to get answers to. Because, for example, we have information that a lot of the support service sent victims and survivors to, for example, the store where they purchased a system. Now, if anyone of you has ever been on Oxford Street at the Apple store, you cannot be sure that you get really good technical advice by talking, you know, necessarily to a shop assistant. So I think it's really important to ask the question, how can we support victims and survivors that feel currently not in the position to seek help because they are not receiving the information necessarily at the support sector level, who feel themselves overwhelmed by the technological progress. They are not able to do that with the police because the police only touches phones if there's an ongoing investigation. And neither, I believe, technical services or technical actors currently provide that offer of support. So we need to think about where can they go to seek help. I also have pointers for industry actors. So for example, and thankfully I saw that Apple recently, or was it Android, has started to prompt notifications around, for example, are you willing to continuously share that location data? Because that could flag if stalkerware is being on your phone. And also we have heard, of course, from Kaspersky and other malware anti-malware analysis that they think about the software that is installed. With regards to IoT specific gender abuse, what we saw is, for example, an increasing abuse of the Amazon Ring, which is a doorbell, which allows a perpetrator to monitor who comes in and out. But on the other side, it also allows a victim, after they have left, for example, the relationship, to monitor if an abuser or stalker is coming to their house or not. What important thing I want to mention is IPv threat model. I think the industry has a lot of threat models when it comes to insider threats or external threat actors, state threat actors. But have we thought about threat models that affect kind of victims of domestic abuse, and how in a household actually a threat actor could share an environment? So these are just some pointers that I want to mention, and also the data collection aspect. So how is it can be used and extracted when needed for a prosecution element. A really important mention I want to say is that there's increasing research on like providing assistance and support. So for example, colleagues in Cornell and New York State University, New York University are, for example, providing a clinical support group for victims of tech abuse. So victims can come and receive assistance if needed. And we are very keen to, if funding will be received, to establish something similar in the UK. And the last point I really want to make, because I'm considerate of the time, is the transformation that we're aiming for. Again, I really want to say this is not the responsibility of victims and survivors. It is a shared responsibility between society, politics, and industry. And I think all of these actors have to work together to ensure that IoT systems that we're implementing currently in the market will, be capable of being amended and improved to ensure that 10 years down the line, they can't be abused, not just in intimate partner violence, but often also when it comes to consumer rights in other situations. We have responded to UK government consultations to raise the issue in the policy sphere, so far with mediocre success. Two important legislations that I want to point out in the UK are the Domestic Abuse Bill and also the Online Harms White Paper. In both instances, we feel that technology facilitated abuse, especially through emerging tech such as IoT, is not sufficiently addressed, which we think is a really big risk for the fact that this legislation will come into force probably next spring and last 7, 8, 10 years. And if we're not considering what is on the horizon and purely focus on what is currently the case, social media, we are not prepared for what is really coming down the line in the next years. So we do try our best to get this message across the different actors that we try to engage with. And I also want to say and end by the fact that we conduct still interviews, and we're always open for feedback and ways to improve our research and work. And we also have an ongoing newsletter that might be of interest, where we on a monthly basis inform what we have been up to and what we are researching, what currently research processes are happening, but also what international developments on this front are underway. So I hope this was so far an informative snapshot of what we're doing. I saw there were a lot of questions that I'm gladly addressing in our Q&A now. And yeah, I would point you to our website if you're interested in seeing those materials on your own screen, and look forward to a question and answer session. Hope that was useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leonie. So now we're going to be looking at questions, and we'll open the floor in a second. I just had a few questions myself whilst others are thinking about questions they might ask. The first one that came to me was the fact that you mentioned that sometimes technology can help a victim.
Yeah.
Guise of CCTV, etc. With regards to audio recordings, if one makes an audio recording on their mobile phone during an incident, are these considered as evidence in court, or does one have to say, I'm recording this now, you have to consent to me recording it?
No, it would be considered. I mean, it probably boils down to the type of judge you have, but a lot of judges would consider that. Unfortunately, we know of incidences where victims had even to record their own rape, and yes, that these, that is being used and is grim to look at.
Okay, thank you. Now, there's also, you mentioned Google Home with the log files, pretty much like in a browser. Is there an incognito mode in Google Home, just like some browsers have, where it doesn't keep a history of what you've done with it?
Not to my knowledge, but we have tested those systems last year, so we don't have the most recent version, and we don't have tested them for like last year. So it could be that an update has allowed that I'm not aware of, but not to my knowledge. I mean, no.
Okay, other quick question. Has the GDPR had any, so GDPR being the General Data Protection Regulation that was passed, that became enforced, I wouldn't say recently anymore because it's been over a year, but has that had any incidence on a victim being able to keep their details more private on the internet, as in after they've severed the link with their ex-partner or whatever?
I don't have proof for that, so I feel reluctant to say yes or no, because we haven't studied the correlation of like the reports that have happened before or after. So all I could say is a speculation, and I think that's not good enough.
Okay. There was a question that was on the chat which asked about the gender and IoT crypto party. Is this something that is done face-to-face or is this done online?
So we did it once, and I wish we could do it again, but it's quite hard to organize. So that was purely offline, and it worked. I don't know if anybody has ever been to a crypto party, but crypto parties normally operate on the basis that you go to an event physically. There are angels, and angels are people that have the technical knowledge and are willing to help you. And then on the day, on the evening, for example, you are setting up together with a person, different systems that hopefully help you to protect yourself. Now, this is normally done together with a risk assessment. So that means what is needed to protect what you want to protect. In the context of our crypto party, it was primarily focused on support services. So we had 5 different tables, depending on different topics that have emerged out of our research. So we had internet security, so browser security, we had data security, we had phone security, we had IoT security, and I can't remember the last one, but the most prominent one on this day was actually the phone security one. And we also had representative from the National Cybersecurity Center who kindly gave up the evening to be there with us. And so on each table, there were 2 facilitators, and that responded to the questions that the attendees had. And it would be great to do more of these events, but it's relatively hard to find the required facilitators, but also support workers don't normally work at evenings, and also the trainers often can't take off a date. So it was hard to organize, but I think it really is a model that needs to be strongly implemented.
Right, thank you. This is something which we might be able to help in the future. We'll follow up on that.
Yes.
I've put my microphone, it doesn't look very good. I've put my microphone in front of my mouth because I've noticed some people are having trouble with hearing me, and obviously have to change headset. There is a question next from Siva. So Siva Subramanian, you have the floor.
Thank you, Olivier. This goes to her introductory remark that very little attention is paid by technology when it comes to designing, taking into consideration gender needs.
Yeah.
That it does not go beyond aesthetics and color. What did you actually mean by saying technology does not pay attention to gender-specific needs? Are you talking about a single device that is common for both the genders, but which takes into consideration the needs of each of the gender? Or are you talking about gender-specific devices?
Yeah.
If it is gender-specific devices, or gender-specific technology, that is a way of discriminating, that is a way of identifying between users, and that actually increases the risk of gender-specific abuse.
Mm-hmm. So I was not referring purely to gender-specific devices, and what could be a gender-specific device is, I was recently at a conference where it was about anti-rape technologies. And these are, of course, primarily targeted at victims, female victims. What I mean with we don't think about gender, and of course, I also said other social categories such as age, ethnicity, language barriers. Most of these systems are actually designed with English in mind. And as you can hear, this is not my native tongue. So what I mean with they're not designed with gender in mind is that they, as I gave the example, they're not, for example, thinking, why is a phone of a certain size? How could it be used and abused by certain people? Who has primarily control over what? So these are questions that I don't personally think people that, for example, design phones take into account. Phones is one example, but I gave the example of like other earlier technologies. And with regards to IoT, I don't think, for example, when it comes to the design of smart toys, for example, because they're often so gendered currently as well, what they are replicating with those systems. So both over focusing on gender, and that's what I meant with like making things pretty, but also not accounting for them is equally as dangerous. But I just feel like because often design teams are not very diverse, people are not thinking, for example, to implement an app a tracker that allows for menstruation to be recorded, because probably the team members don't have that are not female. So I think it's these factors where I feel gender should be accounted for, and also race and language and other factors. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it makes technology far more complicated.
Well, as I said earlier, I don't think technology is simple, and I don't think technology is neutral. Nothing is neutral, and because everything that you put into the market will have an effect. And to believe that, like, it's completely without like any bias embedded in it, I think is dangerous.
Thanks for this, Leonie, and thanks for this question, Shiva. Next, we have Pradeep Gupta.
My question to you is how we can create the awareness among the people. Many people are not aware about all these threats, ma'am.
Yeah, that is a very good question. I think what we are trying to do is aspects like this. I do give a lot of talks in courts, in domestic abuse services, technology services. There's a lot of media attention on it now, but again, there needs to be more widespread information. I think from my perspective, in the UK, for example, there's an opportunity through the legislation to raise awareness of this, because we have the domestic abuse bill on the table. We could talk about technology facilitated abuse, and especially IoT in this context. But I just think personally that currently the focus is more on social media, because it has haunted us for longer, and we're not thinking about the next things that will haunt us.
Thank you, ma'am. My request to you that whatever you're talking or whatever material you have, can you share with all of us so that in our own countries we can create the similar awareness?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's all open and freely accessible online. Anybody can print it, and perhaps we can even translate it with help of others.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yes, perhaps is it time? I should have actually mentioned at the beginning that this event was not only advertised with our chapter, but also with the Internet Society other chapters. So you'll see people from around the world.
Yeah, that's great.
That will ask questions. Did I see Taufik Ole who wished to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me appreciate everyone for attending this. It has been a very educating session. I say thank you all, and then I really appreciate your time. And then I appreciate the speaker for putting up all this graphical and creative informations, and then for have done research, and then for every other member that actually want to contribute and those that has asked questions. Please, I would like to see, first thing, in addition to this, I don't know if, like what she said, I don't know if we can be having a session like maybe in all these modern day social media venues, events, like maybe social media week, and some other big event like that comes around in Africa. Because people down here need to know many of these things. And then the Internet Governance Society are trying their best. But I think if we actually support and then find a way of making people aware of this through those events, will actually give us a more mileage and then makes people more aware of what's going on around them, I think.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I think it would be fantastic if the internet governance community would be more outspoken about it, and at the IGF or ICANN level, I think it would be amazing if more of that would be discussed there.
Leonie, you mentioned actually ICANN and the IGF. Well, ICANN, I guess, has got a very restricted mandate with regards to domain names, but the Internet Governance Forum definitely is something that is a good location to discuss these issues. Have you already engaged in these issues in the past at the IGF? And is there, since the Internet Governance Forum is only in a few weeks, I guess, is there a plan for this to be discussed at the forthcoming IGF?
Actually, I got to know about IGF at February this day during Social Media Week in Lagos. So That's why I got to know about IGF. Before then, I never knew. When the president and the secretary came to have a pitch, and then they told us about the internet governance and then many other things. So since then, I've been following their weekly posts, and I've been following some of their events. Sincerely, I am actually convinced about what they've been doing. I never had no such a thing existed before then. I actually appreciated them for that. That's why I said if you can bring it more, at least, you know, for instance, now she was saying it from the background, from the perspective of her own knowledge, and then from the research they've done in another environment. Now we are talking about the A/B testing, and then the compare and contrast. Coming down here, people here, when we look at our own, when we do our own research here, the mentality here is different from what they have over there. So that's what I'm saying. If such things if we can leverage on big forum, like maybe we have Food Week, we have Fashion Week, we have all this, many of these event leverage on social media and internet to actually engage, and so they will, if they will come, they are on the path. So they leverage on the internet to do many of their services, being the present, the 21st century marketing techniques. So they leverage on the internet. You can use those events to actually push in and then engage more people on internet governance.
Thank you, Taufik. Leonie?
Yeah, definitely. So I will not be at the IGF. I was planning to, but I sadly can't. I'm not sure, I haven't looked at the program, if there will be talk about technology facilitated abuse. I'm sure there will be aspects around gender, and you know, there's a lot of people that I know that are there that can address that. With regards to ICANN, I do think ICANN has a role to play, even if they don't only focus on IP addresses, because, for example, when it comes to image-based abuse, it is the question, where are certain revenge porn sites hosted and how to take them down. So they do, I would not take them out just because they focus on IP addresses. And the,
no, IP addresses, I meant domain names.
So domain name.
One of the problems with ICANN is that often people think they are dealing with the takedowns that are based on the content of the websites, and it's kind of misunderstood in a way. They have a limited mandate on this. Usually it's law enforcement or the people that basically ask for this, but which goes outside the remit of ICANN. But anyway, yeah, back to you, Leonie, sorry.
No. And on that note, I do have been presented at the Forum of Incident Response Community event, and I think again, this is another community, the CSIRT community, where I think, you know, they could play a role in this domain as well. I saw that one question was interested in regards to African countries. I can share that there's development in Uganda happening. I'm not aware of other countries like Nigeria, but I think it would be great to, you know, establish like relationship with African universities or support services to think about, like, are they recording these types of offenses? And if so, you know, how are they dealing with that? But to my knowledge, currently it's, and I've only heard that through a colleague as well, that Uganda is actually working on in that space.
If anybody is interested in following up, may they be able to follow up with you?
Absolutely. Like, we're currently working on a major funding bid where we try to implement different research streams. Now, currently we're UK specific in our research focus, but that doesn't mean that we are not like trying to connect with scholars in other countries and other, not just scholars, but practitioners or anyone who is interested in being involved. And I think especially having technologists on board and like supporting this research field is really important, because it shouldn't be down just to the support services, maybe domestic abuse charities, but also police forces to think about that issue. So yes, get in touch. I can share the slide deck. We have the material online, and if you have any, you know, if you know of cases or if you know of any charities in your countries that would like to have more information on that, I'd be very open to get in touch. And also, I think in the long run, perhaps like translating, you know, information material would also be a great way of internationalizing our research.
And I guess, yeah, if you can, because I see the chapters in many different countries. If you are interested in involving your country in this, then that would be that would certainly be very welcome. And with this, I just wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. If you are based in the UK and have not, you've been forwarded this link and you haven't registered as an ISOC UK member, then please do so. It's easy. Go to www.isoc.org, go to chapters, and it's all free. And then you'll be able to keep up with all the things that we do in the UK. And I think I've done enough advertising for this. Leonie, any other things that you'd like to say, and then we can close?
No, I think it's great that the England chapter of the Internet Society is like dealing with that. I hope more countries will engage with the topic. And yeah, I think try to connect with perhaps your local charity in this space and ask if you can help them. Because I think increasingly they're dealing with technological questions that they are not capable of dealing with. So if you have spare time and want to help, I'm sure they would greatly appreciate that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for spending the time. I know you've got an extremely busy schedule. For those people that don't know, it's been several months that we've been trying to find a date when it was okay for everyone. And so I'm really, really delighted that we've been able to have you on today's call. And the best wishes for the rest of, for the research. And I hope that this has been helpful for those people that have attended, helpful for those people that will be watching the video, and that might actually bring new synergies for you and your team at UCL.
That would be amazing.
Thank you. And everyone, I think it's time to go. So thank you very much and have a very good evening, everybody, or morning or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Bye-bye.